unmute. Okay, I think I'm there.
Okay.
But no video, no video.
Okay, let me figure that out.
Hello, can someone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Just working out a few kinks.
I can't see you yet, but I think that's being worked on.
Yes, it is.
Wouldn't you know it? Bless your heart.
So my panelists, do you have the option to go in and unhide your video or to start your video?
No.
That option is not there.
I don't see
Not-
it.
Okay.
I don't see one either.
The only thing I have is disconnect audio, and I sure don't want to do that.
No, no. Okay, let me try something else. All right. All right, I now see Chief of Police. Let me see.
Ah, something's going on.
I think Mary Kay may now be promoted.
I just
There I
saw,
am.
but,
All right.
I just saw. Oh, here we go.
All right, and it looks like Judge Lora, maybe
Yeah, okay,
one
I see.
now.
Your hair looks fine, Mary Kay.
I have this one place.
All right.
Thank you. I can't see you yet, Laura.
You should be able to see me.
Wait a minute. There you are. I see you now. There we go. I can see everybody. Oh my
Hey,
gosh, that
James.
was like at the last second.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Hey, Chief
wonderful.
James.
Hey, how's everybody?
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Everybody good?
Bad Tuesday for you?
It was all right.
Can everyone be seen and heard? Okay. So I think the last panelist is Irving. He should be on shortly. And we have about 33 participants that are on right now watching. So while we wait, we do have a PowerPoint presentation that really just talks a little bit about our nonprofit as well as the panelists here. Since it is 5:31, we're going to go ahead and get started. And let's start that off by talking a little bit about our nonprofit. My name is Sunny Gravely Fouché. I'm the executive director of Tab Art Center nonprofit. We were founded in 2016 by the owners of the Artist Block, which is our sister company. Our mission is to bring art education and art therapy as well as social awareness to the community. And we've been doing this for a while now. We love it. We employ and collaborate with a variety of performing and visual artists. We advocate inclusion and diversity in the art community and therefore do not discriminate based on race, gender, creed, or sexuality. If you want to find out more about our organization, please visit our website at www.tabartcenter.org as we continue with our discussion. All right. So the next thing is I want to introduce Judge Lora Cubbage. These are a few of the events that we have coming up. We have, or that we've actually done within the past few months. We had our street mural that we did Say It Loud. on Lindsay Street. We have online classes that we've offered in July and we'll be offering again in September. We've also have a recurring classes where we do art therapy with seniors and Alzheimer's patients, as well as our all art summer camp that we do each year. That's a theater and film camp for underserved children. Now, the next panel that we'll have is about Greensboro's art and politics, our art scene, which will be Tuesday, September 8th from 5:30 to 7. I hope you tune in for that. You can also register for that on Eventbrite. And we have a few polling questions. We want to learn a little bit more about our audience. So if you could answer the following questions, there is a box that has just popped up on the screen. And it's about 3 questions. We just want to know if you're from Greensboro, what is your age group, and why you were interested in this particular panel discussion. This will aid with the information that our panelists and ourselves and our organization learn about you. Okay, after you submit that, thank you. We'll be tallying up that information as we go. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave that in the chat. We're going to start our conversation off with Judge Lora Cubbage, and it'll be one question, just kind of asking her some informative information. When she's done, we'll have a brief moment to ask 1 or 2 questions before she has to leave for the evening, and then we will continue with the other panelists. I'm going to start off with just giving a brief bio about the Honorable Judge Lora Cubbage, as well as a brief, a little bit of information about who she is and what she does for the community. And when she's done, we'll move on with the rest of our discussion with our questions, our Q&A. Any questions that you have for the rest of the panel, please also add that to the chat, and we will reserve time at the end of the discussion to answer a few questions. Okay, just a little bit about Judge Lora Cubbage. For 17 years, Judge Lora Cubbage spent many hours behind a barber chair, getting to know about the cares and concerns of the citizens of Greensboro, North Carolina. It was there that she realized that she had a higher calling to serve in a space that would allow her to affect societal change and impact top policymakers and leaders. At age 29, Cubbage was a single mother and decided to apply and was accepted to North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. She later went on to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Law to get her law degree and serve the citizens of North Carolina. Cubbage began her legal career as an assistant district attorney in Guilford County. In October 2018, Cubbage was appointed by Governor Roy Cooper to the Superior Court bench. She successfully defended her seat in the November 2018 election. Cubbage views her judgeship as a position of trust and as an opportunity for service. She is collaborating with community, business, justice, and justice partners to improve the courts wherever possible, and is working to help ensure North Carolina courts are open, fair, and welcoming to our citizens and businesses. Thank you so much, Judge Lora Cubbage, for being a part of this conversation. We've also sent all of the viewers this PowerPoint presentation, so if I happen to sum up some of the bios, you can always refer to what was attached when we sent you the link. Okay, starting off with you. My question for you, I really want to find out, what are the differences in responsibilities of legislative and judicial elected officials?
All right. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all of the attendees that are on. Thank you, Sunny, for pulling this together. Good afternoon, Chief James and Councilwoman Mary Kay. It's great to be with you guys again. To answer your question, it's a great question because I think that many people don't know. The legislative branch makes laws, and the judicial branch applies those laws. The only time the judicial branch will have anything to do with changing those, not even changing those laws, but deciding whether the laws that are made by the legislative branch are constitutional or not, is when and if someone or some organization brings that issue before the court. And so a lot of people think that the judicial branch has the ability to change a law if, you know, if they think it's a bad law. It really doesn't matter what a judge thinks as far as whether they're in agreement with a law or in non-agreement. They must apply the law that's on the books, and they must apply it to the facts of the case. On the Court of Appeals, which is the position I am running for, when you're talking about the legislative branch and the judicial branch, that is where most of the issues will be reviewed. If someone brings a case to challenge the constitutionality of a law that the legislative branch has enacted, it will probably first begin with a three-panel judge from the Superior Court bench, which is where I'm currently serving. And if it is appealed, it will go to the Court of Appeals. And one of the most, probably the most distinctive decisions made was this year when a three-judge panel on the Court of Appeals struck down the voter ID law that was enacted by the legislature. And just to break down exactly what happened there was a question on the ballot as to whether the general population who was voters in North Carolina felt like ID should be required to vote. Now, the voters said yes. So it passed the ballot, the voters said yes. Where the issue came in is after it passed and the popular vote said, yes, we think you should have an ID in order to vote. It was our legislative branch that then said, now that this has passed, we get to decide what the criteria is for what makes an ID valid or non-valid. So they put that criteria in place, and there were several organizations that then sued the legislative branch saying that the criteria that they put in place for what IDs were valid or not valid were unconstitutional and discriminatory. That took the case to the Court of Appeals, and in a three-judge panel, the Court of Appeals, after they reviewed all the criteria, their opinion and ruling was that the legislative branch went in with precision and decided to discriminate on IDs that were mostly carried by African Americans, and then allow say that other IDs were voted that were mostly carried by non-African Americans. And so they struck it down as not being constitutional. And the end result of that was probably approximately about 300,000 or more African American voters will now be able to go to the polls in October and November, and they will be able to vote. So you will hear people say, especially opponents, I am a proud Democrat. I am running on the Democratic slate as the Democratic nominee for seat number 5. However, I want to stress, I am not a Democratic judge. I am not a Republican judge. I am an independent judge whose rulings are predicated on the rule of law and on the facts of the case that come before me. However, my opponent, the Republican opponents, are advertising around North Carolina that registered Democrat candidates that are running for judge are trying to be legislative folks on the bench. And the reason why your question is so important, because I definitely want people to understand, a judge cannot change a law. The only thing a judge can do is review whether that law is constitutional or not. A judge can only review that if a case is brought before that judge. And if a case that challenges the constitutionality of a law is brought before the courts, it is absolutely the mandate of the judges to review that and make a decision as to whether it's constitutional or not. That is not making the law, that is doing what the judges are elected to do. And the reason why that is so important to me and so important to get across, especially to what I perceive the majority of this audience to be, which is African Americans, is because myself, as well as Chief James, as well as many other African American leaders, we only are able to sit in our elected positions or appointed positions or chosen positions because of folks over the course of history that has brought before the courts constitutional challenges to things that the legislative branch has enacted. Thank you. Sorry so long.
No, thank you. I really feel like the audience needed to know that. I mean, we really need to be educated about realistic expectations of our elected and appointed officials. And so I appreciate you just letting us kind of know the process and giving us an example. And that's a great example of regarding voter suppression. I mean, that's something huge that's going on right now. We'll allow one question, possibly two, for the judge. As long as it does not have to do with any pending case. So let's see. All right, right now, does anyone have any questions for the judge before she leaves the panel? All right, thank you so much, Judge Cubbage, for being a part of this.
So two things, Sunny, before I leave. First of all, is there a way to watch the rest of the forum without being a panelist? And if
Yes,
so,
you can.
could you just text me that link so I can get on? And the second thing, I just want to let your participants know and explain to them, I'm a very transparent judge. I believe in transparency of the judiciary, and I want all of the attendees to understand and know that one of the reasons why I'm getting off of the panel is because a judge can never be on a panel and discuss or have things discussed that may eventually become issues for the before the court. And some of the things that's going to be discussed regarding police reform are surely going to come before the court. And I cannot allow my silence to make someone think that I'm agreeable or not agreeable or biased or not biased in any way. So I will be jumping off the call, but I will be listening. And again, thank you, Sunny, for the invite. And please, 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 everyone, get out to vote in this 2020 election. Your vote counts, and it is definitely necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you want to continue to watch, you can log off and log back on and be a part as a viewer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much for being a part of this. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead with our discussion. I know time is limited and we want to respect our panelists' time. Our first question for the evening. A lot of people have been talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and systematic racism throughout really history, but throughout a variety of aspects of American culture and livelihood. My first question is, do you believe that racism exists within the police department? The Chief of Police, Brian James, would you mind starting off the conversation?
And
Yeah, thanks,
when you
Sunny.
start, Chief of Police James, could you give a brief overview of your background before you start answering the question?
Okay, all right. I'm not sure where that one came from. So I'll just tell you really quickly. I'm actually from Greensboro, grew up on the northeast side of town. I went to Page High School as well as A&T State University. I actually started my career with the sheriff's office. I worked there for about 2 years and came to the police department in 1996. So I've been with Greensboro Police about 24 and a half years. I've worked really all over the department, from patrol to Police Neighborhood Resource Center to training, criminal investigations, traffic, just about everything up to the point in which I got the job on February the 1st. So, so I've had a lot of experience. I also went back to school, Pfeiffer University, got an MBA back in 2008, as well as I've gone to a number of different professional leadership schools in policing throughout my career. So, so I've had a great amount of experience up to this point, and still learning new things every day. So, so if you like, I'll go on with the question.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I'm sorry. That was our administrator, and I was supposed to introduce each of you and talk about your bio before you were to speak. So that's why she suggested that. But I love you introducing yourself. So maybe we can,
Okay.
each of the panelists can do that before,
All right.
before answering the first question. But yes,
All right.
please.
Yeah, and thanks for everybody being here. Hey, I see Irvin on now. So, but let me talk about that. And it's not a simple answer to that because, you know, the place I got to come from first is, you know, I didn't just grow up in Greensboro. I grew up Black in Greensboro. And, you know, when I don't have this uniform on, I always identify as a person of color or a Black man. So I have to say that the racism exists in this society. Now, when I look at filling vacancies in the police department, I'm filling those vacancies with people that reside in our society. What I know is that everyone has some type of bias. And I think that if you can at least start there, that every single person has some type of bias, then we really can't go much further in this conversation. As far as racism, we talk about the practice of discrimination and prejudice. What I'll say about the police department is that I won't tolerate it. And anybody I have in leadership won't tolerate it. We have policies against bias policing, meaning that you are exercising your power and authority as a police officer based on somebody's race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or anything that's really beyond their control for the simple fact that they fit a particular demographic. We don't tolerate that. One thing that we have to do, and I have to do as a police chief, is make sure that we're recruiting the right people, making sure that we do thorough background checks, psychological checks to check for any type of biases, and also making sure that we have the proper training once we get those people here and letting them know and understand that this is what we won't tolerate. And I would say that if there's any type of racism being actively practiced within the police department, that is not tolerated. And my job as a police chief is to make sure that I have a system in place to detect that type of behavior and to help those people make a swift exit from the police department as soon as possible. I think that, you know, we have to look at policing historically too, because Black people have a very adverse relationship with law enforcement in general. I mean, when we go all the way back and look at the videos, which back then there weren't a lot of videos, but you have the videos from the civil rights movement where police were doing things that, of course, were totally inappropriate against peaceful protesters. And then we also look at behavior that we see today. And of course, with the technology, we have more video, we have greater access to it with our smartphones and computers. So we're much more aware of what's going on. So what we have to do here in Greensboro, and I hope to be a national model for that, is making sure that we have a system in place to make sure that racism is not actively being practiced. Now, when I look at the population in general, I've got over 750 employees in the police department. Is it possible that someone harbors some type of bias or racism in their heart or their mind? Absolutely, it's possible. If I could detect that, I would. We've got as many things in place as we can to make sure that we do. But what I have to make sure is that, first of all, getting the right people in the police department, making sure that whatever type of biases that they may have are not practiced within the police department in the performance of their duties, and just making sure that I have a system in place that we can detect that and help those people make an exit from the police department, or really from police work, if that's what's in their heart, because we just can't tolerate it. Police officers have a lot of power, and with that power comes a lot of responsibility. So we can't risk having someone on our police department that practices any type of bias towards any person in the community that we serve.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for your response. Councilwoman Mary Kay Abuswader, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, as well as sharing what you believe, your insight about this question?
Yes, of course. And thank you so much for having this panel and forum. And want to thank everyone who's had a part in this and all of the participants for tuning in. I've been in Greensboro my entire adult life since 1972. So I feel like I kind of Greensboro is my home. That's number one. Greensboro is my home. I started here in university. I owned a small business for 22 years, which led me to have a lot of relationships with the police officers in the community. My children went to Washington, Lincoln, Dudley, one went, and one went to Page. So I've had a broad basis in Greensboro. My husband owns businesses in East Greensboro. At one time, we owned businesses in every single district in Greensboro, which is one reason I ran for at-large. I felt I had kind of a feeling of how each district in Greensboro was. Served on the Human Relations Commission, took the Citizens Police Academy course. So many things over the years that have led me not only to the position I have been elected to, but have also given me a broader understanding of Greensboro and its residents. I feel that everyone feels comfortable reaching out to me, and I always listen to concerns. As for the question, racism exists. I think we can all agree racism does exist. Do I know what racism and items that have come forth with you as a Black woman or as Chief as a Black man or Irving? No, I may not have had the same things happen to me. However, you know, I am in a biracial marriage. My husband is Middle Eastern. We have seen times where there have been racism remarks towards him, or those subtle ones that you hear about and the ones you see. So while I can't say what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, I certainly believe that I have the willingness to listen and to try to understand. Am I going to understand fully? Probably not, but to try to understand. As for the question of, is there racism in the GPD? You know, Chief, I think, so eloquently answered that. He doesn't want any type of racism in his department. He wants to know now, he talks about recruiting. He wants to bring in the brightest and the best, those who have the perfect sense of what a police department should be. And I believe in giving him the trust and putting faith in him that he will hire those people. One thing that has come to light is, and I've been very impressed, he has been in the community speaking to community members. I do believe if he knows of a problem or a challenge or an issue, I know he's already taken care of many, and I certainly know that he will pursue others. He doesn't want that in his police department. He wants to be able to be proud of his police department, as we are in the city. We want to be proud of our city, and as an elected official, I can guarantee you that that is the mission statement of the city of Greensboro, to treat everyone with respect. And that includes everyone of every race, every sexual orientation, everything. You know, every single resident should be treated with respect, and we should have accountability on that. I agree. But, you know, I think the chief said it very well.
Okay, but do you believe that it has existed in the police department prior to Police Chief James?
I do not believe the entire police department is racist. I believe there have been racist people in any department in our city. You can take any department, PD, any single department within the city. But I do believe that those in control, those in administration, if they happen to know about this, that person will no longer be employed by the city of Greensboro.
Okay. We love to hear from you. Thank you, Councilwoman. Community activist, Irving Allen, would you mind introducing yourself and telling everyone a little bit about who you are, as well as answering the question?
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. My name is Irving Allen. I am a Greensboro native and a community organizer, community activist from Greensboro. I've been active in Greensboro since I was a young man. My parents made sure that I was involved both in the NAACP and in social issues when I was young. Went to Dudley High School, Lincoln Middle School, like Mary Kay's children. Attended A&T State University, came up in organizing through the beloved community center here in Greensboro. I've just been working in the community ever since, particularly around the issues of community and police violence. And so that's a little bit of my background. To answer the question, I think both, I'd say historically and in current practice, I think that we can't deny that there's racism both in our society and in our police department here in Greensboro. And I think it bears out through the numbers that you see. I think, for example, in 2019, 80% of the arrests in Greensboro were of people of color for marijuana in Greensboro. And I think we have to look at the particular context of history, the context of our laws and how they've been applied, as well as the inequities in our society. And when you have those contexts, then you can see the barriers that are created in some parts of our communities, particularly in East Greensboro, that don't necessarily manifest themselves in areas of West Greensboro. And I really hate to categorize it as East and West, because there's been a lot of movement of communities within Greensboro. And so, there are pockets of West Greensboro where folks, probably grew up in like the Grove community up the street from Dudley High School that were relocated when that community was revitalized. So there's been a lot of movement in Greensboro, but I could think that you can see from the application of the laws, from the outcomes in the criminal justice system of who's in front of the courthouse on Monday morning, that there's racism both in our society and in application of the law. And I think that, it would take a concerned focus. And I think we're in a particular moment now where we can lean into some of the actions that are needed to happen. And I think the next question we'll get into, we'll talk about some of the actions that the community has suggested and have also been historically suggested to help remedy some of these problems.
Okay, thank you. I noticed in the chat that a few people were curious about when they would be able to ask questions. If you weren't here in the beginning, I just want to let you know that at the end of the conversation, we already have some questions that I think that it may kind of answer some of the questions that some of the viewers may have, but let's just listen to everyone. And at the end of the forum, we're going to give you a few minutes to ask a few questions. So we will hear from you. All right, the next question is, why do you think Americans are outraged by present policing methods, and what actions do you believe can be taken to change the current climate? So I'm going to switch it up a little bit, and I'll start this question off with our community activist, Irving Allen. Would you mind starting us off?
Not at all. I will take it away. I think the first question has to do with why the community is so upset. And I think particularly, I guess, pointing to the uprisings that we've seen both locally and around the country in reaction to George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor's murder, and so many other issues that we've seen across the country. But we've also had particular instances here in Greensboro that folks have had these experiences publicized, and have had little to no resolve of those instances. And then we've had a particular practice of having community conversations, bringing people to the table, but not necessarily producing fruit from the conversations that we've had. And I think you can, I've been a part of the conversation for a short time, but I've seen the table repeat several times as to, who gets called to the table when we have these flashpoint events that happen. And so I just have to say that there's a long history of causation both locally and nationally, that, you know, you can date back from the Reconstruction era up until now of police community interactions that haven't been positive, and that history carries on till today in many cases. And I think that there's a living history within the community of things that have gone unsettled, like the 1979 massacre here in Greensboro, like you know, several cases that we've had in both past and current history here in Greensboro. I think it speaks to that relationship. And I think to move forward, there'll definitely have to be some sort of acknowledgement and reconciliation with the community. And I think that that starts with, you know, not only a conversation, but action steps that, you know, can be taken on behalf of both the police department, the city council, the county commission, the state legislature, and so on, of you know, historic wrongs. You know, we've seen reactions even from when I first started in the streets in probably 2013 here in Greensboro in protesting and organizing. You know, we've carried a message even back then of invest, divest. And that came with my work with BYP 100 and their Stop the Cops and Fund Black Futures campaign. And that was, you know, 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. And so I think that the request of defunding the police, while it may seem jarring to some people, it's a request that's steeped in history, back to the freedom budgets of the 60s, to you know, the Black Panther movement, to the abolition movements and free South Africa movements of the 90s, up until today. So there's been a long tradition of the ask to relinquish resources from state forces and the police department, and invest them in communities so that they can be used to heal communities and create more healthy communities, because we know that the safest communities that we have aren't the communities with the most police officers, but the communities with the most resources. And so that's what we're trying to create with the request. And I think that, you know, it's a reasonable request, especially based in the history of what we've historically done, which is give funding to the police departments at enormous scales to solve these community problems. And I think that, you know, even police department officers that I've had conversations with would agree that the tasks that they're given in the community is enormous, and is something that oftentimes that they may not be the most equipped to handle. And so I think that spreading that responsibility around not only puts the onus on community to get involved in safety conversations publicly, but it also alleviates that pressure from police departments to serve so many roles.
All right, thank you, Irving. And you did touch on one of our next questions, but I want to go to the Chief of Police. Chief James, what are your thoughts about this question?
I think that people are outraged, rightly so. I mean, we certainly in this day and age, we have access to much more information, and so we're aware of a lot more. I don't think that some of the bad examples you see, I don't think that they just started occurring. I think they've been happening for a number of years. It just wasn't the technology to capture it. Now, I'll say something that people may not agree with, but I think it's probably less of it happening now than it was 30 years ago. But you know more about what's going on now because you have the video. Because what I'm saying is that, you know, police officers with our particular department, we wear the body camera, so we're able to pull up the footage and see exactly what's going on. That serves as a protective measure for our citizens. it also serves as a protective measure for the police officer because it gives you the whole story. So it protects them against any kind of complaint that may not be accurate. It also can protect a citizen from bad behavior from a police officer. I think that, you know, the way that we try to change that current climate, you know, the first thing is through communication. A lot of times we get inquiries about a vehicle stop or just an encounter, and we have the benefit now of the video. Oftentimes we look at it and it just requires an explanation as to what was going on, what the officer was trying to accomplish. Now, sometimes those complaints are accurate and the officer did not follow our policy, and then we address that. But I think that, you know, certainly having a relationship, I know Irvin talked about a lot of the conversations that we've had over the years, and no fruit is born from it. And I believe what he's saying, but I also believe that we can't stop talking about it. I think that a lot of times, you know, I have conversations with people, and we may talk about, you know, 4 things and we agree on 2 of those. Well, what we have to do is, okay, let's take the 2 things we agree upon, if that's progress, and then we have to work on the additional 2. But oftentimes what I find is that, you know, people, if I don't agree on all 4 things or all 4 issues that you have, or the way you like to address them, then it's kind of like an all or nothing. And what I tell people, it can't be nothing. We've got to find what we agree upon. We got to push those issues forward. And then we've got to work on the things that we don't agree on and try to come to some type of agreement. Because I tell people there are a lot of things that need to be fixed in law enforcement. There's also a lot of things that need to be fixed in our city and our society. It's Tuesday right now. We're not going to be able to fix them all by Friday. And what we have to make sure we do is when we make these changes to policy, to laws, those have to be measured changes, because oftentimes if we don't do the research, if we don't look at what the after effects could be, we could have some unintended consequences. And I know Irvin talked a little bit about defunding police, and I think that's probably going to come up again. But what we have to look at is, and this is what I tell people, I understand the shifting of resources, but if you got communities right now that don't have resources, that are suffering from a disparate amount of crime, if you all of a sudden suck funds out of police departments and try to put them in communities with those particular resources, it's not going to have an immediate impact. And in the gap, you could experience an increase in crime. And that's what I worry about. Now, if the city makes a concerted effort to invest resources in our communities, and I know you didn't want to reference East and West, Irvin, but let's just say East and West. East Greensboro doesn't really look like West Greensboro. And I think we should all be able to agree on that. If the city makes a concerted effort over time and they shift resources to those communities that don't have enough resources, and then over a period of time, we see that, okay, there is a significant reduction in crime. And instead of me being authorized 674 police officers in 3 to 5 years, maybe I only need 600. I'm just throwing out some round numbers. But what I'm saying is that the investment has to occur first. And it's not just police. I mean, the city spends a lot of money on a lot of different things, not just the police department. And I'll tell you, over the last 10 years, the overall city budget in Greensboro has grown faster than the police budget has grown. So you got to pay attention to the investments and because, and I'm not throwing stones at anybody, but we see buildings popping up all the time and things like that, that I'm not getting any of that money, so we have to look at where our overall investment is going and look at how we can invest in communities. And then maybe we do that. And then over time, you tell me in a few years, okay, we don't need 674, we need 600. And we could easily reduce our numbers through attrition. So that's my perspective on it. I think that we have to stay in conversation, because even though things have been tumultuous this summer with the murder of George Floyd, I still feel like we've made some progress. And the good thing about it, if there's anything good to be said about this whole period of time, it's created a sense of urgency around a lot of different issues. And it feels like we're able to push some things and get some things done a lot faster than they would have been otherwise.
Thank you, Chief. Councilwoman, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I certainly think Americans are outraged by anyone who is in a level of authority going above and beyond and using excessive authority, or in the case of police, I think we've all know that the George Floyd incident, I think every police chief in the United States has condemned what happened to George Floyd. I think most officers, probably 99% of officers have condemned what happened to him. I think we can take that and say that, you know, it has built up. There have been other incidents, of course, and it has built up to a point where people are saying enough, and I understand that and I respect that. But I do have to say, as Chief James said earlier, he wants to make sure that his department has the ability to stop things like that. So I know that he has, you know, in his short tenure, has stopped the use of excessive force. He has made sure that other officers will intervene if something should arise where they see another officer doing something that they should not be doing. So, you know, I have to give him credit for trying to almost immediately, since he became chief, trying to change these policies that will help benefit our community. I think one important thing as well is communication. You know, communication and conversations like this, the hard conversations, because I know at so many community meetings we hear, and I know Chief has heard, Irving, you've been there probably to a few as well, they keep saying they want more police, but then you hear, we don't want any police. So you kind of have to balance that and listen to all sides. You know, trying to communicate with the community communicating with the police. A lot of it is doing things just like today, being on this panel, having everyone sit at the table. You know, I've known Irving for years. I highly respect Irving. He's a great guy. I've known Chief James for years. So the more that we can come to the table, the more that we can look at policies, the more that we as elected officials can try to change things in the community to make it better for the community. But yes, I think people are outraged by some of the things that have gone on for years. And as Chief said, you know, we are now seeing more videos of things like this. And I do want to say, Greensboro has been very proactive. We are the first city in North Carolina to have body-worn cameras. We have also done so many things. Our mental health initiative, having mental health associates available 24/7 to police officers that come upon incidents, or GM 911 dispatchers who hear about incidents concerning mental health crises. We have also moved forward with Cure Violence. While it is only in a few census tracts, you know, there have been no homicides in those 2 census tracts since we initiated that. So I believe Greensboro has been very progressive in trying to be proactive and try to stop some of the things that are causing incidents. So, you know, I just really believe that the more we can talk about it without rushing into changing policy, we need to get the advice not only of our community, but also those in charge, like the police chief.
Okay, some of the things that you were talking about, are those new things that have just been implemented when you were talking about the mental health?
We implemented that, I believe it was in late spring, it may have been longer than that.
March. It was March.
It was March.
About March 5th, March 16th, I believe.
Yes, the city council
Okay, so
voted
that's
on.
somewhat been since all of this has been going on.
That happened in March. Now, Cure Violence was even longer ago than that, I believe. So Cure Violence, the city put up $500,000 to initiate a plan where there would be interrupters in certain census tracts. The census tracts were looked at where there had been the most issues and challenges, and they are working very diligently. And so far, I've had no homicides. I must say, however, what we are seeing is a spike in crime. And I really believe that we need more officers to help us address the spike in crimes and our homicides. So when I think we're going to talk in a moment about defunding the police, I'll be happy to say a little more then.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next question. All right, our next question, actually, we can start this with you, Councilwoman. I'll take turns kind of starting off with each panelist. Our next question is, has there been any law or policy changes matter movement began in 2014?
Well, I can speak to the policy changes that Chief James has implemented. Perhaps he may want to, if I miss one or two, fill in. But, you know, I know that since the George Floyd incidents, the chief has banned chokeholds. He requires de-escalation techniques to be used. And all of those things, I must say, mean more training for his officers. So he has, where officers must exhaust all means before shooting. And that means they must go through very carefully, even in those split-second decisions, they've got to think through, have they de-escalated the incident enough? Duty to intervene, I spoke about that earlier. Ban shooting into vehicles. He started that one the first day in his tenure. So there are so many, he requires comprehensive reporting on any incidents. So since 2014, I'm sure there have been other things changed in the department, but I've basically been focused on what he has done since he became police chief. And I do believe that he has the ability to want to do change, as evidenced by the things he has changed. He's only been in office since February 1. So, you know, I have to say that he has come through with a lot of different changes for the department, and I believe that we need to put our faith in his actions.
Okay, and Councilwoman, did you notice that there were any problems before Chief James became the chief of police and began to make these changes? Did you notice anything like that before, when we're talking about from 2014 until now? I know that the chief has made a lot of changes, but did you personally notice any problems before he became the chief of police?
I believe that, yes, I believe there have been problems over the years. Did we hear about them as much? No, I have to credit the Black Lives Movement for that, bringing it to our attention. Was I aware of a lot of things? No. Was I aware of a few things? Yes. As for policy changes in the department, I don't know that any transpired since 2014 until Chief James. He could probably answer that better than I.
Okay, thank you. All right, Chief James, I'll repeat the question. Has there been any law or policy changes since the Black Lives Matter movement began in 2014?
Well, I can't speak to laws, but as far as policy, let me say that a national trend has been to go to the body cameras, which we spoke about. Now, we implemented body cameras in the fall of 2012, which was actually before Michael Brown in Ferguson, which launched a lot of things that happened nationally. You know, I've been in the chief's office, like Mary Kay said, since February 1. And on February 10th, I actually implemented the policy around not shooting into moving vehicles, not shooting at or from a moving vehicle. Also on June 8th, I changed the policy, as she mentioned, duty to intervene, meaning that an officer has to intervene either verbally or physically if they see another officer using excessive force, as well as reporting that to a supervisor. I specifically put that language in there. There was always a duty to intervene, but I wanted to make it more clear so that there was no question regarding public's inquiries about it, and I didn't want our officers to have any doubt as to what they are required to do. Also, banning chokeholds, which they were not banned. That is a deadly force measure. That was already something that was prohibited, but we specifically put that language in policy. And then also, we implemented a policy about warning when feasible before using deadly force or any other kind of force. there was one, and I'm speaking specifically to some of the things that were included on the 8 Can't Wait. One was, and I've seen it written different ways. It said warning before shooting. I saw one that even specified warning before drawing your firearm, which isn't always practical, because if an officer walked into a situation such as an active shooter or something like that, or someone was already using deadly force, then they would be expected to take action immediately. So trying to warn that person might not be feasible. So I wanted to clarify that. Another thing too, and this is what I focus on, getting the right people and keeping the right people in the police department. So we recently implemented, which is gonna, I announced this in June. We're currently in the process of making this happen. It'll probably start in January of 2021. But have the officer have a psych eval every 5 years after they join the police department. Right now, currently, you have a psych eval when you first join the police department. Unless you're involved in a critical incident or we observe some type of behavior that's unusual, you may never have another psych eval during your career. I'll tell you, I have not had a psych eval since I was hired with the police department. Fortunately, I have not been involved in a critical incident, and I have not had any significant issues. So in 5 years, we're going to reevaluate officers, because the job itself can take a toll on you with the things that you have to do, the things that you see. So we want to make sure that those officers have the right frame of mind to stay in law enforcement and perform the way they should. The other part was that we are also looking at a plan where each officer would have access to a mental health counselor at least once a month, and that would be covered by the police department to make sure that those officers stay in the right frame of mind. Because mental health is a real thing. It's a real thing in the community, which Mary Kay mentioned, that we've got the behavioral health team in place now that's responding with us to calls. But also, these officers have to be in the right frame of mind before they go on duty, because a lot of the things that I've seen, nationally and just over my career, I can't believe that those officers were in the right frame of mind when they were doing some of those things that we've seen that are so egregious. So those are some of the things. I mean, I spoke mostly to what I've been able to do in the roughly just over 6 months that I've been in office. And also, we are certified, we're accredited by the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, which actually requires us to periodically review all of our policies and make sure that we're doing things that are best practices. So we come up for review about every 3 years. As a matter of fact, we're going to come up on a review in the next month, where we have an outside entity will come in, review our policies, and then also speak with some of our staff about the things that we're doing within the department.
Just curious, with the new policies, are there any, what would be the repercussions if these policies were violated?
I mean, the not so easy answer is it depends. I mean, for instance, if each officer, so for instance, if you violate a policy, we would do an investigation, and then if it's determined that they violated that policy, then it would be reviewed by a chain of command, and in some cases would be reviewed by me if it was a terminable offense. So for instance, if we're looking at if an officer, let's look at the choking policy, the no choking policy. If I were, and just to give you a simple example, if I were being overpowered by somebody and I was on my back and they were about to hit me in the head with a brick, and I reached up and I grabbed them, around their neck to get them off of me, well, technically that's choking. In a situation like that, if I'm about to get hit in the head with an object or something like that, it could be considered deadly force. So what I'm saying is that we would have to look at the actual act of that particular officer, do an investigation, and then determine whether or not they violated policy. In some of these cases, like for instance, if an officer used excessive force, depending on what type of force that was, I mean, it could be a terminable offense. So we would have to weigh it. And when we talk about force, and just to give you an example, if you were to use, as a police officer, if you were to use force on anyone that you were not justified in using force, it would be classified as excessive. Now that could be just grabbing somebody by the arm, which is a certain type of force. But if you had no reason or no right to grab that person by the arm, that could be considered excessive force.
Thank you. Thank you very much for answering. All right, our next question, we'll start off with Irving. There has been a lot of conversation about defunding the police. Some people see defunding as totally getting rid of the police, and some people believe that defunding is taking away some of the funds in order to give back to the community. Having said that, what is your definition of defunding the police, and what do you believe the advantages and disadvantages are?
Absolutely. Before I get into that, I would definitely like to answer the last question as well, because it's a rare opportunity for me to brag on the police department.
Okay,
because
fantastic.
I have been organizing alongside and with the police department for a long time in the community. And so I've been here through Chief Ken Miller, through Wayne Scott, and now through Chief James. And so we've had vast changes in the police department, both in policy and practice under those administrations. And I think that we're at the furthest point that we've been in thus far. And I think that we owe that to the organizing that the community has done over the years. So for example, we've seen the temporary moratorium on stops of vehicle infractions in Greensboro, when Greensboro was unfortunately in the New York Times for the disparities in pullovers, and the community band together and was able to organize, and the police department actually created a moratorium on pulling over folks in Greensboro because they recognized that they had a problem. Now that was temporary, but it was a change nonetheless. I remember when we first started, or when I first started organizing, where you go to report misconduct for police officers happened at a small table next to where you pay your water bill. So you will walk in. I think now the participatory budgeting office is right there. But before you would walk in, if you had a complaint, you would sit down with an officer at that table, and you would have an open conversation in front of people who paid their water bill about the worst day of your life, probably. So that changed in the police department when the community started to organize to bring light to the problems that we've had with the overview mechanisms of the police department, as well as the reporting processes for how you report misconduct to the police department. I think we've seen vast changes in that as well. And I give the organizing of the community all the thanks. We've seen an apology of sorts for 1979 from the Greensboro City Council. And I think that both from a governance standpoint and from the police department standpoint goes a long way in beginning to heal some of the divides in the community and to till the ground for these conversations that need to be had. So I think, I can go on and on, but I think that we've had vast changes in the police department. And I think that it's been in part due to some of the relationships that have been built with community and the police departments. I know I worked a lot with Deputy Chief Henson when he was in the, I guess, community liaison role. And that's how I got to know Chief James before he was Chief James, through those relationships. And, he actually invited me to speak to his classes that he taught at Guilford College. And I believe Chief James actually taught classes as well. And so I think there's been much community dialogue and a lot of changes that we've seen at the request and at the demand of community organizing here in Greensboro. So I don't want to erase that history, and I do want to kind of correct when I said that the conversations didn't bear fruit, because we've seen a lot happen here in Greensboro, and I do want to give credit and honor to that. As far as the current question in defunding the police, I think it's important to build a point of reference, because I think it's a historical conversation that we've been having since abolition around what's needed to strengthen communities in the context of our history here in America. And so I think first I want to start with identifying that we're talking about three specific different buckets when we're talking about the conversation that we're having within defunding. And defunding the police is actually the middle ground of these three buckets. So if you support defunding the police, then in this framework, you should be considered a moderate, because on one end, you have reforming the police, which we've done many times and have a history of funding police departments, ramping up funding, getting tough on crime, however you want to identify it in the history. From the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, you see the ramping up of police departments. And I think that it's a direct response to some of the asks of the times of the 60s and 70s and 80s of the organizers that, we canonize today, like Martin Luther King, who we talk about focused on income inequality and really a redistribution of wealth here in America. And I think that message kind of gets lost when we talk about King. But police reform, we've seen happen time and time again, where the communities have come to the table, made a litany of lists and requests of city governments and of police departments. And what we've gotten in return is more police and bigger police budgets. So we've asked for programs, community programs, youth programming, after school programming, housing assistance, universal wages, and none of these concepts are new. They've all lived in this long history that we've seen of police reform in ask. And so when we talk about defunding the police, which is the middle ground, I believe, we're just addressing the budget first. And I think that that's something that hasn't been done in these conversations. I think when we talk about racism and inequity, we like to talk about how people feel, people being mean to each other and those type of scenarios. But I think that what we don't see is the history of inequity in this country has been the plunder of underprivileged minority communities at the expense of everyone else. And so we intentionally created these communities that we didn't invest in and gave them the remedy of police departments. And so defunding the police is creating a balance in the history of how we've dealt with inequity and what we've asked police to do in our communities. And I think that, that there's time now, the time that we're in now, it's prudent to add balance to that dynamic. And I think that the third bookend of what we're talking about is abolition. And I don't want to leave that out of the conversation as well, because I think that defunding the police, while is a step in abolition, but is not an end goal. And I think abolition is an end goal to an abolition of the police department, is a process and an opportunity to re-envision what safety looks like in our communities and reapply our resources to what we say that we want to be in this society. And so I think that in the conversation you have reform, defunding, which is investing and divesting in the divesting from the police department, investing and building in communities to make them more healthy. And then you have abolition, which I think is an end goal to that process, in which like Chief James said, when you make those investments and see the reductions, you may realize that you don't have the same problems that you do after you make those investments, and after those investments have come to reward. Then that's when you're in a space where you can talk about abolition and not having the same practices that we've had historically to govern our society. And I think that now we can use this moment to kind of reassess where we're putting our resources and envision not only what's possible, but what we want to be as a society, and put that into play in our budgets, in our allocations, and in how we practice just, you know, existing with one another.
Okay, thank you. You brought up a very good point about the resources. Having said that, Councilwoman, I'll ask you the same question. What is your definition of defunding the police, and what are the advantages and disadvantages?
Well, I think the main belief in defunding the police is, as Irving mentioned, you know, taking some of the budget resources from the police and to put into community initiatives and lifting up communities. Well, I kind of answered that earlier in my other comments, that the city of Greensboro has already put $500,000 into the Cure Violence Initiative and also into the Behavioral Health Initiative, having mental health associates available for our officers. That was also $500,000. So when you say defund the police, I would like to say that most of our peer cities and those that have just about the same number of people that we do have police budgets that are way more than our police department has. For instance, and I know Winston-Salem has less people than Greensboro, but their budget is 80 million. Greensboro's, I believe in the last, was 78 million. So even cities like that. I do want to take a moment on defunding the police to state what I, as a council person here in the community, when businesses are wanting to come to Greensboro, I think it's very important here. Their number one concern is the crime in the city. They want to know that they are going to move their company or bring their company and employees and families to a city that is safe. This is the theme that I had mentioned earlier, also comes from our community neighborhood meetings. They want more police. Now, what we are trying to do, of course, is make sure there is a balance. As Chief said, he doesn't want any bad officers in his department. Well, that is also going to take more training of officers. That is also going to take more recruitment of officers. That is also going to make that the officers need continuing training. As he said, the psychological testing, the racial equity test, groups and initiatives that they need to follow all the time. They need to take those courses. So all of those things, to me, when we talk about defunding the police, it sounds to me like we should be putting more into that budget, so all of the things that the community is asking for can be accomplished. And that does include allowing the chief to have the ability to recruit the top-notch officers who will definitely complete the mission statement of the police department to treat everyone with respect. So I think that's very, very important here, that we not defund the police and take the resources they currently have. I wonder which community programs are going to be cut. You know, the police department does Operation Pass, where they give out well over thousands of book bags and school supplies every year. Is that kind of a feel-good thing? Sure it is, but it also helps build those relationships in the community. They do Operation Yuletide. They do a lot of outreach. They go to all of the neighborhood associations. So many things that I would really, really hate to see cut within our police department, because those outreach and community engagement opportunities are very important to a community. So as Chief is, I know I keep saying Chief James, but as he said earlier, he doesn't want bad officers in, but we've got to be able to give him the funds to recruit the best officers who will follow the policies of his department.
So let me ask you a question, Councilwoman. Because you are at large and you are representing the community, do you believe, I understand your position with wanting to support the police, but do you believe that there does need to be more resources allocated directly to the community to really deal with these concerns of safety? Because a lot of these concerns have to do with mental health issues. It does have to do with the disparities and all the things that Irvin kind of mentioned. So it's not just one thing. It's not like crime can be just packaged in a little bow. It's so many different aspects to it. Do you believe that there should be resources that are specifically for the community and for helping the community?
Oh, definitely. I just don't believe that resources, let's talk money, should be taken from the police department for those initiatives and the things that the community needs. As I said, we've already working on the cure violence and the mental health initiatives. That's $1 million right there. Can funds be found? Of course, there are grants out there. There are things that can be done in order for the city to be able to complete those things. We need to look at the reasons why we are having an increase in crime. A lot of it, you know, I know people have said we've got food deserts. We've got food deserts in our city. We should not have food deserts in our city. There have been great strides by the city to help, because when you have people in poverty and you know, it's just the cycle of poverty over and over again, we need to lift up everyone in Greensboro, because that only makes Greensboro a better place to be. So I hope I kind of answered your question. I don't want to take from the police budget, but I do hope there are ways we can find funds to put more initiatives into the communities that are needed.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And I want to ask Chief the same question. What is your definition of defunding the police, and what are the advantages and disadvantages in your mind? I know you spoke a little bit about it earlier.
So really, just reallocation of funds that normally go to the police department to go to community programs that would help people in various ways. This comes up a lot, but you know, you talk about the mental health system, and I'll just give you an example. So let's say, you know, I have a mental health issue, but I have access to health insurance and a doctor, you know, so I'm able to go to my doctor's appointment. I'm able to get my medication, and I live a normal life. I hold down a job, I go to school, whatever the case is, and nobody ever knows that I have a mental health issue. If I don't have access to health care, you know, then when I get to a critical state, you know, now my family calls 911. And then the police have to respond. And, you know, we get training dealing with, you know, mentally ill subjects, you know, but we're not experts at that, you know. And so that's when you talk about funding. What I'll say is, if we want to talk about defunding the state, and if there's anybody from the state on here, it just is what it is. But, you know, the state took money from, I'm just saying, you want to talk, let's talk. The state took money from the mental health system years ago, you know, and because of that, you know, there are a lot of people that are out here, a lot of people that are homeless, that are out here, that don't have access to mental health care, whereas, you know, many years ago, they may have had greater access to mental health care. When you look at what the city is doing, I think it's great that it's at least a first step in the behavioral health response. But really, the way most municipalities are divided up, typically the county is responsible for the mental health aspect of funds for a county, you know, for Guilford County. So, you know, I commend the city in at least trying to do something to enhance our response, you know. But what I'll say is, I mean, you got to look at what overall investment is in your city. You're not going to find enough funds in a police department to cure all the ills of society. And as I alluded to before, cities, including Greensboro, we spend money on a lot of different things, not just police. And what I was telling you earlier, you know, the police budget, or let me just say the city budget overall has grown at a faster pace than the police budget has over the past 10 years. When I first started at the police department, I started in 1996. We had about 195,000 citizens in Greensboro. At that time, we had about 475 officers. Now we're approaching 300,000 citizens, and we're authorized 674 officers. I don't have that many right this minute because we have vacancies, you know, but as the population has grown and the city has expanded, you know, we of course receive more police calls, and not all of them are crime related. You know, some of them are traffic and things like that. So naturally that budget over time has grown. But like I said before, if cities make those investments, you know, in those communities and it starts to bear fruit, now I may not have as much crime in those communities where we're receiving most of our calls and most of our complaints. And then in a few years, they say, okay, you know what, instead of 674 officers, maybe you need 600, you know, and then we can slowly reduce that number through attrition, because we have people that retire and people that seek other opportunities at some point. So we could reduce that number through attrition, but we've got to see the crime reduction first, because right now, what I'll tell you, and this is what I have to look at from an operational standpoint, violent crime in Greensboro is up 11% compared to what it was this time last year. And also our homicides are up. We've got 33 homicides in the city this year, which is the most we've had at this point at any given time. Last year, we had a total of 45 homicides in the city. We're already at 33, and we still have 4.5 months to go before the end of this year. So that's a concern to me. And, you know, I understand the bigger picture, but at the same time, when somebody is calling and they got a crime issue right now, we have to have officers to respond to that. And that's why I'm saying that, you know, if you look at police budgets and any other budgets, it has to be a measured response. You just can't say, you know, we're going to slash the police budget by 25%, and then we're going to invest it in these other programs, because those other programs are not going to bear fruit before you suffer the impact of not having enough police to respond to those problems that still exist. So I completely get it, but again, you got to make the investment first, and you got to see the fruit of that before you can start talking about slowly decreasing your the size of your police forces. I would love to have less calls and less crime and be able to have more conversations with people and build better relationships. But we do have to address the crime issue.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Chief James, for answering those questions. I'm sorry. We're going to take a moment to do a Q&A. We did have one last question about what each panelist and what the viewers can do based off of this panel conversation moving forward to make changes. But we want to respect everyone's time and give our viewers a moment to ask questions. So right now I'm going to give the floor to Tirsa Gravely, who is our administrator, and she has gone through the chats and she's going to ask some questions. Go ahead, Tirsa. I apologize.
Okay, great. So I went through and I tried to put a few of your questions into a similar category. And so bear with me as I pose these questions to the panelists. So one question is, Chief James, you mentioned earlier of how the policy of wearing body cameras is now in place. Are body cameras always on? And what happens if an officer turns off the camera?
Yeah, so anytime an officer is interacting with a citizen on a call, they're required to have that body camera on to ensure that we do random audits to ensure that officers are using their body cameras. So essentially, I can run a call or a call list for any officer, and then I can look in our system to ensure that there's a body camera video for each one of those calls. Now, of course, the call is not, I'm sorry, the camera is not running continuously, you know, throughout the shift, but if they get dispatched to a call, they are required to activate it. As far as the body camera footage, if a person files a complaint, we keep that footage basically forever. If it's attached to a criminal case, we keep it essentially forever. If it's a case where essentially it was a regular encounter, nothing happened, there was no count of arrest, it was just a regular call, and we may have had a conversation with somebody and cleared the call, we keep those videos for 90 days.
Okay, and then if an officer turns off the camera?
Yeah, So we have a policy where you have to, the camera has to remain running while you're on the call. So we have a specific policy that they have to have that camera running for the continuation of the call. If they turned it off or for some reason didn't cut it on, then that would be a policy violation, and we would handle that with internal discipline.
All right. There were a few questions that had to do with the practice of interacting with the citizens whenever you're on a case. So one question asked, are police trained in lethal versus non-lethal shots?
Are we talking about deadly force?
I assume that's what that question referred to. So, you know, I guess as we're watching on TV, maybe sometimes you'll see where an officer on TV will shoot someone in the leg versus shooting them in the heart. Is that something that police officers are trained on, being able to distinguish between what can be a lethal shot versus what is non-lethal?
No, the officers are trained to shoot center mass, and that is pretty consistent across law enforcement across the U.S. and really across the world. When we talk about lethal shots, if deadly force is used, it's used to stop the imminent threat of deadly force against you or a third party, not necessarily to kill. There are times, of course, when lethal force is used, but the person does not die. But we do not train, for instance, to try to shoot people in the leg or in the arm, and not to be funny, but to shoot the gun out of their hand, because I still get that question. If you ever handled a firearm, just going to a range, shooting at a static target, and without any training, you'll understand how difficult it is just to shoot a static target that's there, much less if you had a person that was active with a deadly object or a firearm coming at you or coming at a third party and trying to shoot that person in an extremity would be extremely difficult. So we train to shoot center mass, and of course the scenarios where you can use deadly force are very, very limited.
Okay. And as you mentioned deadly force, there are other things that may not seem like deadly force, but perhaps have been banned, like chokeholds, for example. Have hog ties been banned, or the use of canine dog units? Are there any policies regarding those two things? Those were a few questions that people asked.
Okay, so we don't hog tie people. We don't, and I don't want to get into any specific cases or anything, but we do not. We have what we use, of course, handcuffs. We have what we call limb restraints, which is in our policy. And by the way, our policies are online through our website. And limb restraints are essentially Velcro straps. You know, if somebody is trying to assault somebody with their feet or something like that. We do have canines. Under very limited circumstances, would we allow a canine to go off a lead or off a leash to go after a suspect? You know, so we have very strict parameters around when we use a canine. 95% of what we use canines for are actually tracking people, and not just people who are running from us, but oftentimes people who are lost, and also for article searches. Like, for instance, if somebody was running from us and dropped a gun or something like that, of course, we wouldn't want that gun to be found by an individual, or especially a child. So they'll go out into like an outdoor area and sometimes an indoor area to do an article search and look for a weapon. But under very limited circumstances would we ever release a canine on an individual.
What are the consequences for officers that misuse their power or use excessive force or actively harm residents? Is there a process that we should be aware of as citizens?
That's a broad question because it could cover a number of different things. What I would say is that, if you give me a particular scenario, I could tell you essentially what would happen. But at the same time, just like any process, officers do have due process within the police department. So if they are accused of violating a policy, we do an investigation. And if it looks like that person could either look at any type of discipline to include termination, then that person has the right to have a hearing within the department. They also have the right to appeal any kind of adverse action. If it's a termination, they could actually appeal that to the city manager as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chief James. Let's see, I think I have enough time for perhaps one more question that could go to Mary Kay as well, Councilwoman Mary Kay. How is a person appointed to the Greensboro Criminal Justice Advisory Commission and the Police Community Review Board?
Yes, so the GC Jack, as it's called, what happened when it was first formed was there was a slate of people who were voted on by city council. Now that some of those people are coming off, then certain council members have the ability to appoint someone. Now, what we try to do is have at least one from each district, and some of the districts can have two. So I would certainly advise anyone who is interested, and the same goes for the PCRB actually, to fill out an interest form for a board or commission. It is on the city website. Look at the boards and commissions if you're interested in that, or specifically interested in the PCRB. You can state that as well. And as openings come up, then people are appointed to those openings by council people. Does that help answer your question?
Yes.
Yes.
Could I just add, in,
Yes.
since I didn't have any specific questions,
Go ahead,
I
Irving.
wanted to also mention, I think that, lost my train of thought. All right, okay. So specifically with the body camera footage and that process as well, I think that there should be a specific focus on the state legislator, and particularly John Fairclough, who orchestrated a bill around the time when we had the first wave of uprisings and protests to essentially keep the public from seeing and having access to that footage. And I think Greensboro was actually one of the first cities to actually go through the process of going to court to clarify that Fairclough legislation. And so I think that if folks are interested in the process behind that, then I think that you should really look into that Fairclough law, because I think that it serves as a barrier to what we thought that the body cameras and body camera footage would lead to, which is more transparency from the police department, more clarity and access to the footage for the community. And it didn't result in that because of the John Fairclough bill. So I think that you should definitely research that and find out what we can do about that. And we have elections coming up, so govern yourself accordingly. And then I also think that just the notion of the I guess the mystery behind the processes and punishments and all of these things that go along with the questions around the situations that are being raised by this conversation shows that that we can have more transparency in our processes, in our policies, because I think that folks don't actually know how these things work. And so I played a part in helping to construct the JC Jack and organize alongside the folks with the PCRB for many years. I was kind of like the unofficial liaison for folks who went through that process, and I was able to go through it so many times to identify where the lapses are for community support in that process. And I think that we got to a point where it was really just worth it to encourage people to get a lawyer and use the process just for documentation, because there was no resolution coming from the process. And I think that we've still got a long way to go to work on that process internally. And I think that it can go a long way if the community gets involved starts going to the JC Jack meetings, starts asking questions about the data for the police department and making public information requests and seeing where these things land and really getting involved and putting your hands around the conversation. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't add on that there is no direct correlation between the size and of a police department and the amount of safety that exists in areas. And I think that we need to be reminded of that when we visit these conversations, because we point to these extreme circumstances as if they don't exist for us currently now. Now the murder rate is rising, and we have a fully funded police department. Now crime is rising, and we have a fully funded police department. And so I think that those are things that we have to take into account and maybe start to challenge some of the old tropes that we use to address how we look at crime and how we assess it. Because I think that some of those may seem to be and be proven to be outdated if we take an earnest look at our society and how we want to exist with each other. Then I think that we'll discover that some of the ways that we're looking at crime, describing crime, and allocating responsibility for these plighted communities to the crime doesn't really equate, because we created these places with the lack of investment, the racist policies and practices that we had historically over the years. And it's going to take sustained investment, sustained political will, and sustained community involvement for us to be able to continue on the path that we need to go to see the change that we need to see.
Okay, great. I see that we're over a few minutes, our end time. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Sunny to ask the last question of the panelists. And it's a good segue from what Mr. Allen was just speaking about.
So as we dismiss, first, I just want to thank all of the panelists for participating. I really appreciate Chief James for all of the changes that he's been making during his short tenure here, and his openness and willingness to have these very uncomfortable conversations. And I really, really appreciate you for this, Chief James, as well as Councilwoman. Of course, your insight, Irving, and all of the things that you've been doing in the community are wonderful. What I'm hoping from each panelist is that we are listening and paying attention to what people were putting in the chat, what they're discussing, what the community is really, really asking for. And it really is about improving the relationship with the police as opposed to increasing numbers to the extent where we lose that personal relationship with one another. But I want to thank everyone. And as we dismiss, I'd like for us to think about what steps we can take in order to change the current climate. So if you're a viewer, you can put that in the chat. As a panelist, if you don't mind, for just a few seconds, just to mention something specific that maybe you got out of this panel discussion that maybe you'll take back with you and consider and think about and possibly change something. Councilwoman, is there something very quickly that you were taking from this conversation that you will change?
Well, I think I as I stated very early on, this is an opportunity for me to listen to Irving in the community, to listen to Chief in the community. And I hope that the community members will reach out. I think that's one very important thing here, Sunny. Reach out and know that someone like me, an elected official, will sit down with you. Irving knows that. And I do believe that we need to treat each other with respect and dignity, and I am listening.
Thank you, Chief James.
Thanks, Sonny, and everybody that helped to put this on. What I'll say is, like, some people from the outside looking in, might think that, for instance, like Irvin and I are on like opposite ends of the spectrum, and that's actually anything but the truth. we simply hold different positions right now. I'm serving as the chief of police. Irvin has been a community activist for a long time, and I think we probably agree on more things than we disagree on. And even the things we agree on, we probably don't agree on how to get there. You know, so that's where the conversation has to happen. So a lot of respect for Irvin and what he's doing, and also a lot of respect for the people that I agree and disagree with, but we have to keep having these conversations. What I'll say is, you know, I have a vested interest in this community. A lot of my relatives live in this community who could be stopped by the police. So it's in all our best interest to have a good community first, and a good police department that serves the interests of that community. And we just have to keep working together and understand that if we're working together, that means that we're all on the same team, and even teams and even families don't always agree, you know, so we just have to keep working and keep making progress as we can. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to everybody. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. And Irving, do you want to close us off with a few words?
Sure. I learned a lot from this conversation. I really appreciate everybody for being on the panel, for giving their time and their talents, and everybody for joining in on the conversation. I learned a lot. I learned that basically me and the chief are just haggling about time now with this defunding thing, and we can have some more conversations about that. And so I'm excited for that. Mary Kay's always been willing to come to the table, so I'm looking forward to more dialogue around that. And I'm also interested around the reparations conversation that her and Goldie are introducing. So I hope we can do another one of these and talk about that, because I think that conversation piggybacks on what we've been talking about today. And I appreciate all of everyone who's probably older than me allowing me to talk about history for a little bit.
Well, thank you so much, viewers. I just want to let you guys know we are going to be continuing to have panel discussions. You can let us know what you're interested in. Our next discussion is going to be September 8th between 5:30 and 7. We're going to be talking about art and politics. A lot of people have had a lot to say about the street murals and some of the policies that need to change. So we want to talk about that. We'll also have a panel discussion talking about real estate and the difference in values and the way that race affects the value of properties and what resources we're actually entitled to in the city. So those are going to be riveting conversations. And now, you know, Irvin, you put another one in there. You're right. Reparations. We need to talk about that. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, my panelists, so much for participating in this much needed conversation. And we've already sent out PowerPoint presentations, but this is being recorded. So you can go to our website, which is www.tabartscenter.org within the next few days, and we'll upload this recording. And I believe there have also been some news stations that live stream, specifically WFMY, thank you, live stream this event. So thanks again, everyone, for viewing and for participating in this conversation. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.